for today we are essentially gonna talk about like social AR and creating within like the context of social AR. But before we go like even further, I'll just give a quick introduction to myself. I'm an art director with an interest in technology. So I started out my journey or my career in the context of like doing graphic design, but I've always like to dabble in tech, whether it's like through websites or stuff with like interactive elements. So I've been doing things even outside the context of graphic design where I do like live skill like interactive installations as well. So you can find me on Haikel on Instagram. For today, like we're gonna talk about like social AR and have a little bit of hands-on. But so obviously with social AR, we've done stuff like obviously with the rainbow filters and even like do Pokemon Go. It's somewhat in the context of AR, but we just have to understand also the difference between what is AR and like the different forms of it as well. So in a nutshell, this is like a good description of what AR is. Obviously, it's like this is from Wikipedia, not the best source, but it basically captures the essence of what AR is. By the end of the day, like the simpler theme to AR or what it is basically superimposing digital artifacts onto like the real world environment. So whether it's a 3D creation or even like your JPEGs or your PNGs or even like stuff that you do through sound as well. AR itself, there's like two trains of thought. There's a marker based one and then there's markerless. And the one on the left, marker based, is basically things you would find AR that's anchored to a physical object. Most of the time it's going to be like flat and it's going to be a printed artwork itself. So you can see stuff on the left where it's even a child's drawing or even a proper like illustration where it's done from like Illustrator or stuff like that. Then there's markerless, which is somewhat basically anchored to the real world where the camera is trying to detect a plane. So stuff like your Pokemon Go, basically there's no like actual physical identification, but it's just looking at the ground. So even the one at the bottom right where you see oh my god being like augmented there, if you see the grass, there's this like little like cues of it trying to like detect where the actual like plane of it. And then this is just like a good guide of like the type of AR devices you have, like from the scale of like business all the way to the consumer. And the business side of things, you have something that is very sci-fi looking ish where it hits up displays like the HoloLens, and then you have holographic displays, then you have smart glasses, Snapchat spectacles, for example, and then you have your handheld device, which is either your smartphone or your tablet. And most of the time we are dealing with like the consumer side of things, is because like with the smartphone, everyone has it in their pocket. So that's where you want your experiences to be, so it's easily accessible to everyone. Because like with the other three, it's a nice feature for like, someone to experience the AR stuff, but getting them to buy that is always like a hurdle. And there's three types of experiences. Like when you want to experience AR, basically you have like the native application stuff like Artivive, Pokemon Go, IKEA Place. Artivive is an interesting one because you can do the marker based stuff, but it's fairly easy to quickly like prototype and develop like your illustrations and your AR at the same time. And then you have your web AR where someone goes into a browser, then they can like access the stuff with the AR bits. But I wouldn't say it's not as nice as the social AR or native applications, because with web AR, everyone has like different browsers on their phone, and the problem is trying to create those experiences to work across maybe Safari, Chrome, Firefox, stuff like that. So I'm not inclined to like do work on web AR. That's just my like personal choice. And then you have things like social AR, which I'm sure most of you has like come across it or like experienced it one form and another. So you have like things on Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and TikTok. And the reason why social AR has increased in popularity, because obviously I would say one way or another, you either have Instagram, Facebook, or Snapchat, and you don't have to download an additional app to have fun with all these type of experiences. And for today, specifically, we are going to deal with like Instagram and Facebook as well. So Spark AR from Facebook is basically an AR development where you get to create like filters out of this. Then basically you can either deploy it on Instagram and Facebook. So the next few minutes is basically us gonna be doing a bit of hands-on with it. So we'll talk briefly about like what Spark AR is and the features that lets you create stuff out of it. So there's things, and the naming is slightly different from what I've just presented at the first few slides, because they have a specific naming system, but how it works is basically the same. So you have your marker based stuff is technically your target tracker, and target tracker is basically if you input an image within within the app. Let's say, for example, it's your drawing and you want something to be anchored onto your drawing, so you use a target tracker. Initially, you can only have like one target tracker per experience, and when I say experience, is basically when you finish your experience, it's basically what is going to be seen on Instagram or Facebook, that finish like project basically. So the target tracker is nice because I've worked with as small as a name card, but then I also done like bigger scale things. So the nice thing about this also, you can have multiple images within your experience, and you can anchor a lot of things like within the experience. But the problem is, even though there's no limitations, right, the max I would suggest is having only like 5 anchor image. And the reason is, obviously you can have more, but when you do that, it's gonna be more laggy for like the older device. And there's also like a file size limit of like 4 MB within each experience. And the reason why there's this like limitation is because they want the older devices to experience it just as how it's supposed to be used on a higher end device. It's somewhat the logic of like creating AR is also similar to like if you were to create a website. So, obviously you can have high-res images, like, hundreds of high-res images, but it's gonna take fairly slow to load. So you just have to like balance out, what you can sacrifice in order to like actually have a more wholesome experience for your users. Yeah. So then you have, the first one was the target tracker. Then the next one is essentially the face tracker, and the face tracker is the bulk of things that you're gonna do today. And most of the face filters you see like online through Instagram or Facebook is also what is being used here. So the nice thing about face trackers is you can identify one up to 5 people. And the way it's kept at 5 is because they wanna try to limit the amount of people like within that camera angle. So if you imagine like, if you take a selfie with like a group of people, it's very difficult for you to try to squeeze in like 10 people in one frame. And the further you get away from like your camera's device, right, the more difficult it is for the face tracker to identify those faces. So 5 was like the nice limit for them to say, okay, this is what is going to work. Beyond that, I think it's going to be a bit janky slightly. So you can do stuff with the face tracker where you can map your designs onto the face directly, like the one on the right with the smiley, or you can use the face tracker and place objects within like their face, like anchored to their face. So it's similar to like the target tracker, but this time around, instead of like an actual like painting or image or whatever, the tracker is the face. So you can do more complex stuff in the advanced part of the development program, where you can create interaction. So stuff like when you smile, then something happens. All that can be done within Spark AR, but there's minimal like coding, I would say. Even for me, like I don't come from a coding background, but I think it's fairly user friendly to like get started. And the documentation within like Spark AR Studio itself is very helpful as well. So how do you actually get started with like creating a face filter? Is they'll provide you with a face mesh, and this face mesh is essentially like a 3D model which is going to be wrapped around the user's face. So the one you see on the top left here is basically how it looks when something is mapped onto your face. But imagine like you're wrapping up a box and then you open up the wrapper and then it becomes flat. So that's where you see on the right. And I don't know if y'all can see the red dots on the right image. So those are like the trigger points of the face. So for example, like within Spark AR, you can actually create interactions based on like smiling or eyebrows raised or like even like winking, stuff like that. And those are the points that you want to try to avoid having your designs on, so that the camera can look at the user's face and identify whether they are doing a certain action, stuff like that. So all of this is basically provided in the Spark AR website, but I already downloaded it for you, and it's within like the folder that I provided as well. So there's stuff like, if some of you do like 3D models, you can actually manipulate the face mesh and see how it looks, if your eyebrows is like popping out, stuff like that. Then the last one here is segmentation, and segmentation is essentially trying to isolate the user within the camera scene. So with AR, right, the problem is the camera doesn't really understand, okay, what is being superimposed in the scene or what is not being superimposed. So with segmentation, it allows you to like isolate certain things, whether it's your skin, whether it's the whole user, or whether it's your hair. And the nice thing about this is the documentation is easy now. Like it's just like plug and play, and you can also like stack the animation. So the one on the left obviously is like for hair. The one on the middle one is basically just isolating the whole user, and the one on the right is just like the hand. But if you think about it, it's somewhat like a green screen as well. So you can always reverse the animation and stuff. Like, okay, for example, the middle one, you wanna have like the animations at the background everywhere except on the user. You can also do that. So like the supported file formats are like for the 2D stuff is essentially like PNGs, JPEGs, and SVGs. 3D models is a bit more complex because they allow you certain kinds of like file formats, and it's also because depending on how your animation is. So keep in mind with like 3D animation, you can only bring in materials, textures, and animations, but it's not like the physical based stuff you do 3D, like you're distorting like the shapes and stuff like that. It's very, I would say, basic. And then the audio, most of the time your MP3 files or whatever, you basically need to convert it into like a mono, and so you remove the left and right channels. Then for the fonts, you have like TrueType. But most of the time you are not going to necessarily use fonts, because when you import your own fonts in, it's also adding on to the file size. So I would suggest just having the fonts that's provided within like SPY Studio. And because most of the time if you use fonts, you're going to use it for like instructions, because everything else, if you have like a call out where it's text, most of the time it's just going to be a PNG or JPEG. Okay, so for the hands-on time, we're gonna do a bit of SPY Studio, and if what I'll do is just give like intermittent like pauses between like the sections when I'm going through it. If everyone has like SPY Studio open up, you're gonna get greeted by this particular window. And the nice thing about this, like even though you haven't really do like work on SPY Studio, there's a bunch of like templates for you to work on. And the templates is nice because let's say for this like face mask example, there will be a small call out on the asset, for you to replace or change. But for today's like session, I'm gonna teach you like the basics of how you work with SPY Studio, because then when your foundations you already like more or less get it right, it's easier for you to like explore the whole like program on your own, and deal with your own artwork in the future if you're going to do with it. So what is going to go through today is basically the same kind of workflow, whether you're doing something for a face or something for your image. With SPY Studio open up, right, everyone just needs to like click on the blank project for now, and when you open that up, you're going to be greeted with this particular page. So everyone has the SPY Studio like open up. I'll just go through with you like the different sections of what it is, like how it reacts to your scene as well. So if any of you work with like Illustrator, Photoshop, or any of like the digital creating tools, it's gonna be fairly easy for you, because the logic of having like a layer section and stuff like that is also applicable here. But the only difference with it is you're working within like a 3D scene, and the 3D scene basically you can move stuff around. So I'll go from like the top left. On the top left here, you basically have your scene and layers. You have your scene and layers tab, and this scene and layers tab essentially act as like layers panel within like Photoshop, for example. So if you have a drawing that within your composition, everything is going to get populated here. So by default, there's already a bunch of stuff there, like your device, your camera, your lights, and your microphone. So these are also the same kind of things where, let's say you are doing work within like a 3D program, you have stuff already like already inbuilt with you. But when you populate more things, whether you are adding a face tracker, target tracker, everything is going to be shown here. And the assets panel are basically whatever objects or whatever assets basically you bring into your project file, whether it's an audio file, whether it's your frame animation, your JPEGs, your 3D models. So anything you bring into this project is going to be populated there. And by default, it's going to create like folders for you, whether it's your materials, your textures, and stuff like that. The middle section here of your SPY Studio is basically somewhat like your world space. It's whatever you're gonna see through the lens of the camera, it's gonna be mimicked here. So if let's say you have an object that is placed like in front of this area, then your phone is here, you're gonna also see that. It wouldn't make so much sense now, but after like you actually like start adding things on there, then you'll get what I mean. So we'll start from the top here. You have like 3 buttons there. It's fairly small here on the screen, but the first one is the move button, and then you have rotate and you have scale. So all the objects that you bring into like SPY Studio, right, you can actually manipulate their properties, and you do that like either by toggling on the different buttons there, or you use the shortcuts ERT, so then you can cycle through quickly like how you want to manipulate the objects. Then at the bottom there, the phone here is also essentially to mimic how, let's say, the user's phone, a user is holding on to their phone and what they see in front of like the augmented stuff. And then you have the phone view, which is essentially like the user. And the phone view, this is more of like a 3D viewing of like your whole scene, but then you can also get a preview here on the top right, where you can basically see how it looks through the phone screen as well. And it's helpful because sometimes you need to manipulate certain objects and you want it to look right at a certain angle, so you just go back and forth with like either the world space or just in the preview mode here on the top right. And then the last section here, the inspector panel. For example, whatever objects that you highlight here on the right, on the left, right, the scene tab. So for example, you click on ambient light, for example, it's going to expose all the properties within the inspector panel here on the right. So when we do the hands-on inspect, yeah, then you'll see more what I mean. So for now, once you have this open up, right, moving in Spark AR is basically, so obviously you zoom in with your scroll, like your mouse. Oh yeah, I suggest using a mouse because it's gonna be fairly like tedious to only use your trackpad, but you still can get away with it. In the long run, you should just use a mouse. For you to like, you can do two things that within your scene. Is either you rotate or you pan. So for you to rotate, right, it's either right click and drag, or if you're more comfortable with like shortcuts, then you either do command or control Windows or Mac, and then you click and drag. Then for you to pan around, it's middle click and drag, or op or alt plus click and drag. Okay, so far is everyone okay? Any of you have any questions before I actually start building the face mask with you? Okay, let me just move on. So like I say, on the top left here is where you get your scene and layer step, and it's the same like how Illustrator, obviously the higher your layer is, it gets priority on what gets shown above. So same logic here within like Spark AR Studio as well. So I'll just cycle through like the buttons on the left before we actually start doing it, because it's going to be useful for you in the long run. So you have your workspace, you can like show your patch editors and stuff like this. One is more like advanced, but if you are diving deep into like this program or you're using it in the long run, all this is going to be like helpful for you. Then you have your height, console, summary. So the second one with the video looking icon, and if you hover over stuff, the nice thing is you get like the callouts for it. What is it? So the video is essentially to test out your different effects or maybe different facial features. And the reason why you can drag this to make it bigger. So for now, I'm going to make it this big, just it's easier for everyone to see. So the reason why they have diverse like video options here, it's not at random, is because when you're trying out your face filters, right, they want you to test it out as much as possible, with even with like the different facial features, the different skin color. So obviously, you know, people have turbans, for example, then you have like someone with glasses, and then you have like someone with short hair, long hair, stuff like that. So all this is also helpful for you just to see how your design look on like certain facial features. And then the last option here, I think most of you would only have 8. The other 2 is just me, and you can import your own like videos, for example, or even if you wanna see how your face looks on the effect and you don't want to keep like, you know, showing a different expression, then you can always import your own video. And the last one here is basically an empty one, and the empty one is always used if you are using target trackers. Then you can, you can input your own like images or even like a different video altogether. The nice thing about like the videos you have here is always in a white background, and it's helpful if you have like effects that require you to like change the background. But if you need something else, you can always find it online and just like input it inside here on your own. By default, you're gonna get like your webcam here, but if you have multiple webcams like plugged in here, the option is going to be there for you to change as well. Then you have the pause. This one's self-explanatory. You just pause the whole experience. And then you have stop. So stop, basically it's a force stop on your effect. Nothing is being calculated. It's basically on a standstill. But when you do play, right, or pause, there is still calculations like running on your effect. Let's say you are doing more advanced stuff. So let's say if you want a hard stop, then you stop. Well, I'm doing this, right? I'm just gonna pause because it's gonna be like a bit laggy because I'm sharing my screen and doing this. And Spark AR Studio generally is very RAM intensive. So if you have like, 20 browser windows and a bunch of other stuff that's running at the background, your Spark AR is gonna start to drop frames per second, and it's gonna start laggy. I mean, if any of you do like 3D work, you would know what I mean as well. Then the second last button here with the cycle and arrow is a restart. So it basically is going to restart your effect. Let's say if your effect is created in a way where there's a sequence or something happens and then there's recurring events, then you just want to restart. So when you do that, even the video that's being played is going to restart as well. And then you have search. You can look for like your assets or anything that's within like a project file. Okay, then I'll just go through. Yeah. So this is the assets panel where you're going to add stuff. So you can do multiple ways of adding stuff. So on the scene here on the left, right? So like I said just now, when you click and highlight, and if it's highlighted, it's in blue, you can see on the right here. Let me drag this out so everyone can see better. So when you click any of the objects within your scene tab, it's gonna expose the properties based on whatever objects that you highlighted. So, for example, camera, you only have this bunch of stuff, focal distance, but depending on the object, you'll get more inputs to tweak or lesser inputs to tweak. So whatever that's really like within the scene here is a bit of the basic stuff, and 9 out of 10 times, I'm not gonna like remove or delete or edit this stuff, because these are just like the basic objects you need for you to build out your effect. Then before adding an object, so you have to understand as well that whatever objects that is underneath the object. So for example, you're looking at focal distance here, right? Then there's ambient light, and the way it acts is also there's this like parent-child relationship with the object. So let's say focal distance is the parent, whatever is underneath the object and it's slightly shifted to the right is the child of the object. And you'll know that it's because there's a drop down button or arrow button within those objects. So you can like toggle it on and off or hide it if you need to. So to add on objects, you either right click on the objects. Let's say you want to make it a child, you can like right click and add, or go to an empty area within your scene panel. You can do that as well. And the last option is obviously you can add object here. So the add object, the last option here, the nice thing about it is if you like highlight certain objects there, it's gonna give you like a summary of what those objects are and what you can use it for. So let's say you don't know, okay, you need to know what is a plane tracker, then there's a nice call out there explaining what it is. So for today, and I always do it this way because it's just faster and easier for me. That's because I already know, but y'all can like do the other options as well. So the first step you want to do is just like add an object, and the options being shown here are organized in a way that you need to introduce these objects in this manner. So like the first ones usually when you start building out your effects, there's always a tracker involved, whether it's a face tracker, plane tracker, target tracker, and hand tracker. So the 4 options here are nice because most of the time you're gonna start with a face tracker. That's why is at the top section, and then followed by the objects that you can add. So the second column here, or the second panel, you have a plane now object. These are essentially actual objects you add within your world space, like your 3D scene. And then the next panel where you have canvas, rectangle, 2D stack and stuff like that, those are objects that you add like onto a screen, if you get what I mean. So for example, the frames that you see in your your camera tray online that you see, there's this like squiggly kind of frame, those are like 2D objects. And then you have the other miscellaneous stuff, which are your lights that you add within your scene. So you can have like spotlight, stuff like that. And then the last one here is speaker and particle system. The speaker most of the time is if you're gonna add like extra sound effects within your scene, and the particle system is complex for you to understand like within this 1 hour workshop. That's why I left it out. So okay, what you wanna do is add a face tracker, which is like the first option here. So if you click add, by default, nothing is gonna happen. Yeah, you add a face tracker. Oh yeah, there's a shortcut also. Let's say if you know you're already gonna create a face mask, right, and you wanna add like designs on your face, rather than adding a face tracker, you can straight away add a face mesh. So you straight away jump. So it's gonna populate for you both a face tracker and a face mesh for you. So like you see on my scene tab on the left, right, there's a face tracker that's highlighted in yellow, and trackers are always in yellow because it helps you like identify straight away what is it. And face mesh 0. So the naming convention like within Spark AR it's always starting with 0. So everyone should have this like checkerboard like looking thing on the person's face, depending on whatever person that you selected for the video. So like I say, when the camera identifies the user, right, it's not gonna understand whether how, it's not like a 3D scanner where the camera can look at how the thickness of the object and stuff like that. And what I mean is if you rotate, right, even though you have the input video, but this face mesh is essentially just like on top of the video feed, and it's just like a 3D object within your scene. So it's not gonna be like that. So you'll get used to like, you have to get used to actually, moving around and rotating and moving, like looking at it from different angles, because you also want to understand how these objects are placed within your scene, or like when it's mapped onto the face. So the face measure, if you think it's a bit weird because of the checkerboard pattern, it's not, because the checkerboard is an indication where you have an object, and the object, there's no material assigned to it. So whether the material is illustration or texture that you bring externally that you created on Photoshop or Illustrator, or even like that color assigned to it. So I'm just gonna flash you my slides quickly just to understand the workflow. So take it for example that this Legos is like the face mesh is the same. It applies across to like any objects that you import into Spark AR. So when you first add an object to your scene, it's going to be like this checkerboard pattern, similar like to what we've done before. And then when you apply a material to your object, whether you apply a color or a texture similar to this, it's going to be always like by default in white, and I'll show you that in a bit. And then there's no correct workflow. So let's say if you want to apply a texture and manipulate your object, whether you are resizing it or stuff like that, it's also possible. But if you want to manipulate your object first and then apply colors, also can. There's no right or wrong way to do it. So I'll quickly go through with you like how to manipulate like your objects within your scene. So let's say you want to, for example, scale up the face mesh. So what you need to do is just look for your face mesh 0, and then you'll be greeted when you highlight that, right? You'll be greeted with all like the properties of the face mesh. So all of this is essentially like the things that you can manipulate on your face mesh. The first option, the first few options is essentially just identifying what the face where the face mesh is, like layer 0. So if you have like multiple layers, then you can quickly see. And then, okay, for example, if you accidentally click something and or you were looking for your face mesh and it's not appearing, half of the time is you might be accidentally clicking the unchecking the visible function. So it's technically still there, but you just hide it. So it's the same like your Photoshop, Illustrator, icon. Like your objects are there, but you just like hide it. So this is also nice if, for example, you have like multiple objects and then you need to like, composite the other object behind like in a certain position or stuff like that, then you just like check and check this. So for the track face, currently because the video feed has only like, or this particular experience, there's only like one face mesh. So it's going to be like face 1. So let's say if you have like multiple like face trackers, right, you can like toggle on. But for now, we just like work with one face mesh and one face tracker. And it's up to 5 as well. So the face mesh itself is a 3D object like how you can see here on the left. So let's say if your effect requires you to not have like a cutout for the eyes or mouth, you can also do that. And then, so for the position, scale, and rotation here, it's going to get a default of like zeroed out position because it's dependent on like the video or the user's face. So let's say, for example, there's a reason for you to like want to offset the design slightly to the left, right, up or down or whatever. You can do it 2 ways. You can either key in the numbers. Let's say you want to be specific to what numbers you already have, or you can use the arrow. So let's say if you have the objects in place, right, you have these 3 arrows. So these 3 arrows, the green arrow is your y-axis, your blue is for z-axis, and your red is for x-axis. So you can either, like I said, adjust the numbers here, or you can manually like drag it. So if you hover over like a certain arrow, you can move it on that one particular axis. But let's say if you want it to be shifted on 2 different axes, so there's this faint like quest within your object. So let's say if you hover over those quests, right, it's gonna indicate to you what those axes are. So if you click and drag, similar to like how you did the arrows, you can move it in that different axis. So now you have your object that is gonna still get tracked by the face, but it dependent on the position like you input in. So now you have like a very offset mask or face mesh. I mean, you can always do like very funky stuff if you have like 5 different like face masks around the user and then it's in a spiral thing. So it's really dependent on you. And the logic for this is the same for any objects that you bring in into Spark AR Studio. So the arrows will indicate you need to move the objects. And let's say if you are moving those or you're changing something within the object, whether it's the position, scale, or rotation, it's going to update real time on the inspector panel there on the right. So you see when I'm moving it, it's going to change it on the right here. And the reason why, particularly for the face mesh, when you're moving only the position, the rotation changes is because the face is the anchor for the object. So it's just gonna like rotate automatically according to like the face. So far, is everyone good on this before I move on to like the next few steps? If you have, just let me know in the chat.
My question was like, yeah, when you use like control to shift it around, right? Control click, then it will look as if the mask is not fit on the face. Is that an issue or it's normal?
Yeah. So that part, right, is normal. Like how you see my screen now currently, right?
Yeah. Okay. Then is there when the just now you said design intention, right? So for example, when is a case where they will purposely put the mask like super far from the face or something?
I mean, it really depends what you're trying to craft out. So there will be times, or there were some experiences I see where they have like 3-4 face mesh where one was to the side, then the other one was to like either sides of like the user's face. So if you want to do that, then it makes sense. But most of the time when you are trying to create a face mask where it's just mapped onto the user's face, the position is just gonna be like 0, 0, and the rotation is 0. So yeah, so the question when you said when you are in a different angle, the mask appears differently is also because what you are seeing, the user here, the guy is technically like a flat video, and the face mesh is trying its best, or the face tracker is trying to best fit that 3D object onto a flat video. So that's why you see here stuff, it looks like that, but technically if you look at the preview, right, it's fine. Yeah. So for example, let me show my screen, right? Okay. So even though the video here, like it's a flat video of me, but technically if I turn my face, it's fine. So yeah.
I get it already. So basically, because the software you're using is 2D, if the software you're using like in the future is 3D, then this will happen now.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Yeah, good question. So, quick question: if you want to add another 3D object like a medical face mask or a clown nose to the scene. Yep, you are right, Ash. So the difference though with having like a 3D model that is, let's say, a clown or whatever, you need, and this goes like into a 3D programming side of things, you need to read the 3D model. So let's say it's a face clown, right? A 3D model of a face clown, you need to rig joints on the clown's face. So then when you bring it within Spark Studio, you need to map those joints to the joints within like the one within the face tracker here. Yeah. So that one gets a bit more complex because if you have like your own custom 3D stuff and you know how to do it, then it's fairly easy. So I'll go through adding more stuff on top of your head as well. So currently I'm just dealing with like the face mesh stuff. So let's say the face mesh is something that you already like created, is fairly in a good shape, something like that. And you want to add an object, and particularly an object, I'll add a plane. I'm not going to add any 3D stuff because it's the same concept and it's easier for everyone to understand it within the context of like, let's say you have a JPEG or PNG. So let's say you want to add a plane. You can either do it within the under face tracker or like within a face mesh. Yeah. So depending on your scene, you can do both. So what you want to do is just add and look for plane. So the plane is under the second column panel. Yeah. So currently the plane, right, if you see on the scene tab on my left, is face mesh 0 and plane 0, and both of these objects are the child of face tracker 0. So let's say if I'm gonna like disable face mesh 0, it's just gonna disable that face mesh. It's not gonna disable the plane, the visibility of the plane. And oh yeah, and you can click and drag and move stuff within your scene on the left here. So let's say if you have your plane as a child of the face mesh 0, and let's say if you toggle off the visibility, right, it's gonna toggle off both the parent and the child of those objects. So really it's the same logic like your Illustrator, Photoshop, anything that's within that group, you off the like parent and everything else gets like hidden. So I would assume everyone has like this plane added, right? Regardless whether it's added under the face tracker or like under the face mesh, it doesn't matter. So by default, whatever you add onto like whatever 3D objects you add onto a face tracker, right, is gonna be in a position of 0, 0, 0 on the X and Y, X, Y, Z axis. It's just because it's like the center point of the face. So currently, if you have a face mesh, is gonna plane is gonna be like right at the tip of the nose, something like that. So it's the same thing. Let's say if you wanna manipulate this object, right? Oh yeah, be careful of. So let's say if you have two objects that are exactly in the same position, you might think you might be tweaking the values for the face mesh, but for the plane, but technically you were highlighted as face mesh 0. So just make sure when you're moving or adding things around, manipulating things around, just make sure you are on the correct object here on the scene. Okay, so you can just like move it up, down. So even when you are paused now, you all don't have to pause, but I'm just pausing because it gets a bit annoying to manipulate objects when she's like constantly like moving here and there. Then you can like drag. So let's say for this, right, plane, we wanna have it like maybe at the top of her head. So something like that. So now currently, even though it's not a face mesh, but it's an object you add onto the face tracker, the object is gonna get moved or anchored to the orientation of the face, similar to what you see here. Yeah, so the logic is the same with like the trackers here. Anything that's a child of the tracker, it's just gonna be in the same orientation of that tracker, whether it's the target tracker or the face tracker as well. And how you place the objects is the same. So you always start off like, adding an object to your tracker and then you're applying a material. So before I add materials, right, is there any questions beyond this? Okay, maybe before the questions, I'll just like give you two more things. So obviously when you click on the object here, you are by default gonna get the 3 arrows, and that's to indicate the position of the objects. If you go to the button on the top here where there's like a cycle and arrow, and or if you hover over, it's gonna rotate the selected object. So you can click it and you can see this like sphere where it's the same thing where blue, red, and green. So those are just indications for you to like rotate on the axis. If you wanna translate or scale the objects up, is the next button. It's here. So it's similar to like the position. Instead of arrowheads, you get a cube at the end. So same thing if you wanna manipulate like the y-axis or the x-axis or the y-axis, you can do it like that. So for plane, right, it's a bit different. Even though like it's somewhat like a 3D object, but technically it's like a piece of paper where you can apply a texture onto it. So even though it's a 3D object and there's an option of the z-axis here, which is 1, even if you put like 100, right, it's not gonna. So if you manipulate the y, the x, sorry, it's gonna update in your inspector panel here on your right. If you see, same thing like y, but if you change the z, right, even though like currently it's at 2, it's still gonna be flat because it's like a piece of paper and there's no depth to it. Even though like you can even put like 0.1 and it's still gonna retain that same depth. So most of the time you will just work with like x and y. And the shortcut, let's say you find it a bit annoying to keep always like changing the buttons if you need to manipulate objects, right? You can just use the shortcut E for echo, R for Romeo, and T for Tango. Okay, so you can just like quickly manipulate objects rather than wasting time going to the button. Cool. So before I go through like the material stuff, is everyone okay on this? So the nice thing about like Spark ER, you can quickly like add on materials or manipulate objects if you already have your object selected. So let's say currently now we want face mesh 0 and we want to add our own like designs or illustrations to it, right? So with face mesh 0 selected on your scene on your left, go to your inspector panel on your right and look for this tab called materials. So it's gonna be the third last option there on your right, and there's gonna be like a plus button. So what you want to do is just like click that. So by default it's going to be material 0, the same naming convention. Any objects or things that you create is always going to start with 0. And once you click that, right, if you realize on your assets panel on the bottom left there's going to be a material 0. So whatever materials you create new or directly from the object, or you want to manually create it like from the bottom left at asset panel, there is going to be populated within these folders here. Okay, so it's not object like default objects within Spark ER, it's like extra objects that you created within Spark ER, if that makes sense. Yeah. So for you, and by default the option here when you create a new material, right, it's always going to be white. So that's why you have this like white face mask now, and you can do 2 ways to like manipulate it. It's either you double click on material 0 here on your inspector panel, it's going to bring you to that material 0 panel, or let's say you were from like this part, right, you can straight away click on material 0. So same thing, if you highlight this object here, you go to your right, then it basically exposes all the material settings for you. And let's say if you find it a bit annoying to material 0 and you want to be more organized, and I'm sure everyone who uses Photoshop, Illustrator knows what I'm talking about. When you have like 10,000 layers, then you don't know which layer is this, which material is this, you just double click it. So you can double click the name at the top here, or you can just like double click here and rename. So I'm just going to rename mine to face design. Face mask. Okay, so I'm gonna go through the options from top to bottom. Shader type is basically the kind of, it's very ingrained to like 3D kind of workflow where you have different shader types. So you by default you're gonna get standard, which is something that is gonna get affected by light. Then you have flat. Yeah. So most of the time we're gonna deal with like the first four, which is flat, standard, physically based, and face paint. Flat is things that if you have a 2D object or even maybe it's a 3D object and you don't want it to get affected by the lighting in your scene. And then standard was the one that we saw just now, where it's good to like mimic there's like shadows, whatever that's affected light. Keep in mind this, the shadows casted on your object, sorry, is not dictated by the lights like your physical lights in the real world. It's the lights that you have within your scene, your 3D scene. So let's say if your lights within your 3D scene is a bit like orange or purple, then it's gonna show up on your objects itself. Then physically based is somewhat similar to standard, but you have more control in the sense of how those 3D objects is gonna look, where you can add like more roughness to it, stuff like that. And then face paint, depending on the kind of design you have, not half the time, to be honest, I never use face paint because the controls you get is not as you can't control it as much, and if it's on purpose, you want to make it look like as though it's makeup, then yeah, go for it. But most of the time I only use these first three, and then there's a total of like 6 options. The other ones are like blended. You can go see the documentation online when I'll send you the links later on, but most of the time it's like the first 4 that's going to be helpful in like creating your stuff. So okay, quickly, then if you go down, you have the options of color. Then obviously, you can change your color, but for this current like exercise, we're just going to leave it to white, is because if you have like illustrations, right, and your diffuse color is orange, for example, it's going to have a orange wash on top of like the actual like assets. It's similar to like Photoshop where you have like a color overlay. Okay, so the next option where it says texture, that's where you're gonna import in your illustration, whether it's a JPEG or PNG. And for those of you who have already like downloaded the assets folder, I want you to navigate to and look for this PNG. It's just called asset_1.png. So click on texture, new texture, and then just look for, so it's within that masterclass folder, and just look for asset_1. So you're gonna get this like face overlaid with the design. And while you have that, or you're trying to do that, right, let me just show you how that shape is being like mapped. So like everyone has an indication of how it's supposed to look. So within the other folder as well, I already like put in the Photoshop file. Let's say if you wanna quickly like start doing it. So even though it's flat in that manner and the PNG is flat, when it's applied onto the face mesh, it's gonna get wrapped around. So keep in mind, especially like the sides of your face or even like near your brows, even though it looks fairly okay here, there's gonna be like distortion to it. So you have to work with the face mesh, and it's never correct in like your first try. Okay, let's say you have a design under your eye bags or stuff like that. You always need to like, apply it on your object or your face mesh and then keep going back and forth until you get it right. So for this current exercise, I'm just gonna like go through this. And so you have stuff like the shader type. Let's say you want to have that more 2D lighting effect, then you can do that. But for now, just leave it as standard. And when I play it, right, now you realize when she's like rotating in a certain way, the shadows casted onto the object. And the colors here are not as vibrant as your assets, is because of how the light is affecting it and how she's like rotating in accordance to the light that's within your scene. So if I zoom out, right, the lights are here, if you can see it here, but if you have those lights like slightly shifted, you see it's gonna get the other stuff affected on the face. So you can pick more things here, like specular is like the shine on the object, then you can like tweak it. If you want to have that like sci-fi looking thing, you can do that. But for now, whatever this is, I'm just gonna leave it as is, because we're gonna do the same step, apply another material onto the plane itself. Okay, so you wanna select plane 0 here, which is technically what you see on her top left of her head, and we can do the same thing. So create a new material, and by default you're gonna get the same thing. Double click material 0, or you can name it plane material or something like that. So the same thing when you add a texture, right, you can either, when you already import like previous textures, it's gonna be populated here, but for the plane you want to look for the asset_2, which is this. So now even though you have something on the face, you can always have something extra elements that's tracking on the face. But keep in mind, when you add a plane, right, because even though it's somewhat a 3D object, but most of the time, if you rotate the other way, it's going to disappear. Technically, it's going to disappear for both, because the texture is only applied to one side of the object. And for you to combat this, right, what you want to do is, with whatever materials that you already imported, then you scroll all the way down under render options and you click double-sided. So when you do that, then for the plane currently, now it's like there's both sides. Okay, so because it's a PNG, right, by default when you bring it in, there's gonna be this like weird like jaggedy lines, which is like the anti-aliasing. So what you wanna do is go look for alpha test, check that, and then you just like, yeah, so the alpha test is gonna remove the jaggedy lines now, but I think it's because the render is a bit slow, that's why it's not showing up properly. Yeah, but if you have any PNG with transparency, please just like check alpha test. So for this current like exercise, we technically don't have to. So let's say, okay, you already mapped out, you already added materials, and you think, okay, maybe the design looks a bit small. What you could do is just like click on it or any of the objects, but I'll recommend you to pause because it's gonna be a bit difficult while she's moving and trying to manipulate things. Then you can like adjust. Oh yeah, so this is what I mean if you need to check the alpha test. So currently, even though it looks as though it's transparent, right? When you stack any objects that has transparency and you don't do the alpha test, you're gonna get like the top object covering the other object. So if you see the preview video on the right here, right, even though it's transparent and you can see through and you can look at her, any augmented objects is gonna get covered. So for example, you see the shape under her left eye, right eye, is gonna get covered because the setting for the plane, there's no alpha test check. What you need to do is when you click that, everything goes through. So previously it was like that, now it's like that. Okay, so the jaggedy lines is also, it's not very obvious if you see through the video call now, but the jaggedy lines is gonna get like smoothened out. Yeah, if you have any questions at this point, please raise your hand or like unmute yourself, because I know it's a bit like technical and you might get lost, but once you understand like the foundations of this, right, it's basically, you know, add object, add a material, whether it's a texture or color, is going to be the same workflow for everything else. So it really depends on the kind of assets you're referring to. Like if it's a plane, then you know you can have your own illustrations, find certain like free vectors. But oh yeah, so where to find assets to play with? I think if you just give it a Google, like, you know, SparkUR Studio Face Mesh, you can find stuff. But let's say if you wanna quickly do your own stuff, you can also do it in that manner. So what I did was just like, you know, do some Illustrator and then do that. So for actual designs itself, I don't think you can find a lot of like free face mesh, but if you're looking at like the 3D stuff, then you can. Okay, cool. I'm moving on. So once you have, you know, like your object and you add stuff and you want to see how it looks on your face, there's two ways of doing it. It's either you see it through your webcam, or the other way is you can push the effect to your Instagram or Facebook or like SparkUR Player, which is a app that you download Play Store or App Store where you can test out. And for you to test that, before that, you actually need to select an experience, and on the bottom left, add experience, and you can sharing experience. So you have that option of Instagram or Facebook, and then you click done. So you will have this option on Instagram or Facebook if you sign a Facebook account onto SparkUR Studio. Then you have this option, and then when you click send, right, whatever Facebook account that you sign onto here is gonna send you a notification onto that account on your phone, and then you can straight away test it out. So for Instagram, it's slightly different. You need to connect your Instagram account to a Facebook account, and then you only have that option. And then the last option here, so currently this is my iPhone name, then you can just send, if you have SparkUR Player like open up already on your phone, then it was gonna push that file to you. So how it looks is basically like that. So you just send the option, and if let's say the Instagram one, right, it's gonna look like that. It's basically gonna be a notification that says preview AR export. Yeah, similar to that. You open up and then you have whatever file name it is, and then, you know, your Instagram handle name there. Okay, and moving on to the last steps, right? So let's say you're happy with this, you want to upload it to your own Instagram or Facebook for someone to try it. Before you do that, obviously you need to save. So you file, save. So let's say you save as SSBY. So when you save that folder, right, it's gonna populate for you all the objects that you added, whether it's an audio and whatever. But those are just like the working file for you. So in order for you to like publish it, right, online, you need to export, which is, so you go to the button all the way on your bottom left, and there's this arrow up button in a square. It says publish. Then you can either publish new effect, update existing effect. But half the time, how I'll do it is I'll just export the file, and when you export, you're gonna get this .ar export file. So let's say, so yeah, it's gonna be a filter dot, not filter dot, whatever name is .ar export file. So everything is already contained inside here. So it's somewhat like a package file for your SparkUR Studio project. And okay, let's say you're happy you've done with this and you want to get it exported, right? So what you'll do is just export file. You need 4 things. Your export file, which is what I shown you just now, the name of your effect, the icon of effect. And the icon of effect is essentially, you know, when you go to Instagram and there's on your camera tree, there's a bunch of like different looking designs on there. So that's the icon of your effect. effect and a demo video of effect. So the demo video of effect, there serves two purposes to it for both Facebook or Instagram. So for Facebook, it's just for them to look at the video and see whether whatever that you submitted for that AR file is the same like the video, so they know, okay, this is the correct file, because it's either they have someone like manually checking it or there's a bot checking it, so depending in your situation. Then for Instagram, it's the same. They will use it as a reference point to see whether that is the correct like video or file that you have uploaded. And the second thing is the same like on your Instagram. Let's say you uploaded it on your page, right? Someone would have the preview video playing to see what the effect is. With all these like objects, all these assets already prepared, you need to go to facebook.com/SparkAR Hub. So the hub is basically where you wanna upload everything either on Facebook or Instagram, where it's gonna be dealt on there. And when you are on that page, right? So currently, most of you, when you land on SparkAR Hub, it's gonna be empty. So mine, I have like a bunch of stuff I did before. So what you're gonna do is go to your bottom left and click Publish Effect. And when you click Publish Effect, right, you're gonna be greeted with this form. So like say you have your name and then you upload your AR export file. So it's fairly straightforward. There's callouts for you here to understand. Or maximum is 40 MB for the exported file, not 4 MB, sorry. And then you have the option to upload it to all platforms, and all platforms is not only Facebook, Instagram. There's like your Messenger and Messenger for Portal. So I have this Instagram option because I linked my Instagram account to a Facebook account. But if you only have a Facebook account sign in, then you only have one option there. So you can either share all or you can just like share one. Yeah, then you know, if you have Instagram, then you're gonna have that option there. Then you can select your categories, whatever you think is best suited to your effect. Then you can either, the demo video is either you can do it like through a video that you already recorded, or you can just like record it with your like demo file. When you're doing SparkAR, it's only catered for like Facebook and Instagram or like the Messenger stuff. But anything beyond the Facebook suite of apps is not for like Snapchat and all that. And personally, I felt why I'm showcasing you like SparkAR because it's the most user friendly. I've tried Snapchat before, and Snapchat, the way it's set up is a bit more coding friendly rather than user friendly in that sense. But you have very different features from like SparkAR to like Snapchat. So you have your upload image, and you know, if you work with it with someone else, and you can also set a time and date for when the effect it has to be live. So when you do all that, right, when you keep uploading like your demo video and all that, it's gonna also like show you how it looks here. It's like a sample or a mock-up video, like how you get it here. And that's the 4 things you need. So these are also like the useful things, like personally for me, to like get going with like SparkAR stuff. The first one is basically the documentation about SparkAR, from like tutorials to anything that is being released. Oh yeah, keep in mind with SparkAR, right, they always update their stuff. When I started using it like 2 years ago, I was at version 20 plus 27, and it's already at version 115. So they try to always update things, and it's also a good thing because they will, you know, debug stuff. But it's also at a point, let's say if you have a project that's going live soon, try not to use the latest like version, because then if you have any problem, you cannot like debug it in time. So that's just to keep in mind. Then, you know, SparkAR Hub was to deploy your effect. Then there's a community group in Facebook itself, so they will either upload their own creation, give you tips and stuff like that. But there's also like a Singapore version. I can't remember what's the exact name. I think you just search SparkAR Community Singapore and then it pops up. And then this one is more like business based. It's more like in-depth detailed video about like what SparkAR could do for your business, stuff like that. Then Lens List is also nice inspiration. But let's say even if you want to try to do more things, right, you just go to YouTube and search SparkAR tutorials. There's a bunch of it already. With that, before any questions, let me just go see. Which of your works would you say is the one you're most proud of to date, and why? The most favorite one would be like the very first effect that I've ever did, which was like the anti-selfie effect. It was just me like fooling around with like SparkAR to do like maybe 2 years back, and trying to like see what I can come up with, like in the context of me being like a graphic designer. And it's nice because there wasn't a set path. Okay, I want to do this because to make it as popular as possible. It was just me like fooling around, experimenting with it. And because of that, I thought it was nice, and everyone was like receptive to how the effect was. Like recently I checked, let me check now. I think that was like the most, yeah, apparently there was 9 million impressions, and impressions is basically the amount of times either people try it, use it, or open it. And I have like 580,000 people apparently captured the effect. So I think it was like a fun one for me like to work with. And I don't know if you can see the preview video here. Yeah, it's basically the to cover your face kind. Yeah, and you always have to experiment a lot. When you experiment with it, right, then you know like the limitations of what you can do with it. And I'm self-taught with like Spike AR Studio. It's just me like asking around, going to YouTube, the groups and stuff like that, and just see in the context of me like doing graphic design, what can I apply it to like here in AR. So that's quite fun. There's no like right or wrong way to do it in terms of like your own, like whether you come from a all painter background or stuff like that. But in terms of like technically doing things, then yeah, maybe there's like right or wrong ways. When Spike AR updates, does it affect your current posted filters? It doesn't affect it because whatever that's already live, they are gonna maintain those versions. But certain times they are gonna like do a mass update of certain stuff. So maybe if you have filters that are very, very old, then it might affect. So I had filters that were online that was in version maybe 40 plus, and the current Spike AR file was the version was like maybe 80, then they will prompt you into saying, okay, this effect is no longer supported, or it's no longer gonna be supported. Then they'll give you a quick update from the Spike AR hub itself. So that's quite nice. Yeah, but there's like nice prompts on like Spike AR hub, or they'll give you like a notification if something is not gonna get supported. Yeah. If you already publish a filter, are you able to replace or fix? Yeah. So let's say if you already have a filter like live or updated, or it needs more tweaking, you can just like re-upload the file. Oh yeah, so one more thing before I forget, when you want to push your filter up online, like to make it appear on Instagram, Facebook, there's a approval process. The approval process is it used to be 5 to 10 working days if I'm not wrong, if I can. But currently it's quite fast. So you need to keep in mind, let's say you are doing for a live project, you need to buffer in those like waiting time. So on Spike AI Hub itself, when you are trying to upload, there's a number there, an indication of how long you have to wait. I can't remember on top of my head now. But if I'm not wrong, it's about like 10 or 5 working days. Oh yeah, you won't lose the analytics. So it's still gonna be, let's say the first file you uploaded, right? And you already have maybe like, for example, 10 impressions, and then you want to re-upload a new file, that 10 impressions is still gonna be the same because it's the same experience. So it's just gonna like roll over to like whatever new file you uploaded. When you take on commissions, how do you decide if you want to take it on, and how do you think about pricing? Okay, previously when I was still like doing this for actual like commissions, how I did it was I always set I would assume like a baseline of the basic effect it should be. So for example, if it's a face filter, right, the most basic thing you can do is, okay, you have a design on your face and stuff like that, but the price eventually go up, the price changes or update according to how complex the different interactions they want to add on. So maybe the basic filter is just have a illustration on the face. Okay, maybe I give it a baseline, and they say, okay, maybe I want it to get animated, then I'll increase it accordingly. Then if they want to have more interactions with, like let's say if they open their mouth and the illustration animates, then you price it accordingly to the complexity of it. Yeah, because you don't want it to be at the point, let's say you promise them, okay, it's at this price, and when they come back with more requests, you already fix on that price, and then you have to somehow like not sacrifice, basically you have to just price accordingly according to how complex it is. Are there any other projects that you've worked on that have different target marker than the face? Yeah, so I've done projects that have a target marker on a t-shirt. I've done stuff on a name card. I've done stuff on like a huge billboard. I've even done stuff where it was on a watch to mimic like how it's supposed to look if someone was wearing a watch. But in that concept, basically it's still the same. The target marker was like in a square format, and then it's just like on the wrist. It's not like the most ideal like user journey, but in that context, I felt that that was the most like appropriate. If you had no resource constraints, do you have any dream project you hope to take on in the future? I think in the context of like Spike AR Studio, like if I have no resource constraints, obviously if I can use the whole suite of like Spike AR, whether it's like target trackers and all that, it's nice because within that is the context within Spike AR, but it also helps if you know how to do 3D stuff like that. Because I'm like a normal like graphic designer, I don't do much 3D. So stuff like maybe you want to achieve like Pokemon Go, doing that 3D stuff might be expensive. So ideally, if I can do something that is very site specific, whether it's a mural and then you have like more 3D stuff, I think that'd be nice. Yeah. Oh yeah, and keep in mind also, like with target trackers, right, you need to have a certain printed finish, right? If it's shiny, let's say if you're doing a name card or a postcard, and if the postcard is shiny, right, the gloss is going to affect how the camera looks at the target tracker. So it's going to get like slightly confused. So think of it like how AR is your eyes. The darker it is, if you're in a dark environment, AR is not going to work so well. If it's something that is like glossy, the camera is going to be slightly confused. face. So keep in mind, if you are printing stuff on a target tracker, just give it like a matte finish or control as much as you can. So there's more like tips and tricks also on the SSBY website, what's the best practice for like target trackers. So there's like even minor details like, try not to use gradients and stuff like that. But for face, essentially there's not much tips. Just be in a lighted environment, because how they are tracking the face is not through like actually like looking at the eyes, and it's technically like the shadows under your eyes, shadows under your nose, stuff like that. That's all the questions. I want to say thank you to everyone who attended. And if you have anything in mind, you can just like drop me an email. Thank you.